Who came here to lose weight? Anybody willing to raise their hand and say they came here to lose weight?
No enthusiasm.
Okay, the most important question is, keep your hands up if you came here to lose weight. Who came here to keep it off? That's an important question. Who came here to keep it off? Very important. Much different than I came here to lose weight. So much of what's out there in society is how to lose weight. But very little of it is how to keep it off. Losing weight, simple might not be the right word, but there's hundreds and thousands of ways to lose weight. But there's very few people who are keeping it off. And you probably notice that amongst yourselves, amongst your friends, and whatnot. And that's where I feel like I have an advantage. I've been doing this for so long that I've seen and learned a lot about why people struggle with food and their weight. And to be honest, I always get asked, almost always get asked, especially by patients, Todd, did you ever have a weight problem? You can't understand because you've never had a weight problem. I have never had a weight problem. And that always takes away my credibility. But hopefully by the end of the night you'll see that I might know a little bit about what I'm talking about. Sometimes you don't have to have had struggle with it, but I've lived with it with people every day. I started out at a place called the Rader Institute for Eating Disorders. And it was we started out at Mission Bay Hospital. I was just fresh out of college, got my degree in athletic training. I'd worked for the Chargers for a while and realized that was not what I wanted to do. They wanted to stay in a traditional setting. They didn't want to learn how to run faster, or jump higher. That's all the stuff I learned in school. The science of the body, the science of exercise, physiology, and nutrition. They didn't want to hear any of that. So it just wasn't my place. But I got really lucky looking for work after college, and I got a job at the Rader Institute for Eating Disorders. And it was also back then an eating disorder unit and a chemical dependency unit. And while I was in the unit, the patients lived there. We had patients who would come from around the world. I remember a patient we had from Israel. We've had patients from Canada, all over the world. And several of them had never even seen the ocean before. They might have come from Michigan and seen the Great Lakes, but they'd never seen an ocean. And it gave me a lot of insight into why people struggle with food and their weight. I remember the first few months I was there. Remember, I'm just out of college. I learned all the ABCs. You know, you run to build muscle, you lift weights. To run longer, you run more. Maybe to run faster, you do more sprints. You know, those are just some of the basics. I learned all that stuff in school. How much oxygen to breathe in, all the numbers in school. But when I was in the hospital, we had patients that were struggling with purging, throwing up. Sometimes they'd use things to make them go to the bathroom on purpose. They'd hide their food. I remember finding food in people's socks. They would put strings, just like in prison, they'd put strings outside the window, little tiny hole in the window, and they'd hide food on the end of the string. They'd hide food up here. Very powerful disease, those who struggle with eating disorders. And it's the highest disease where people commit suicide, because it's very much of a struggle internally. But after the first few months of working in the hospital, the patients would slowly start leaving. And after working every day with the patients, you start to really care for them, because again, you're there 8-10 hours a day. You start to sincerely know these people a lot, because they're telling you all about themselves. We had patients that were starting to leave after a little while, and then they would go to what we call aftercare. They'd leave and they'd come back. And we'd see them and their families coming maybe once or twice a week. And there was one patient that came back, and she had just started binging and purging again. And I remember being in our treatment team, you know, with the doctors, physicians, and other counselors and whatnot, and being very angry. Oh, what are we doing wrong here? How can this person go out there that I really would say I really care about, and now she's back in her misery, back in her uncomfortableness, back in her unhappiness, back in her disease. And I will never ever forget, they laughed at me with more pity than anything else. And they laughed with love at me as well. The patients weren't there, what they saw in me was, might not be the best word, but ignorance. I didn't understand what was really going on with those patients like they did. Bless you. And it took me, I'm not kidding, at least a good 2 more years to get it. 2 more years to understand why these patients were really struggling with food and their weight. And we had patients up to 1,000 pounds down to 60 pounds. And we had a couple patients over 1,000 pounds over the time I was there.
Sure.
So people who are struggling with their food and their weight, anorexics are just as compulsive with food as the compulsive overeaters. Just as compulsive, they just might not eat. They're cooking it all the time and playing with it all the time. But I didn't get it. I didn't understand, and that's why they had laughed at me. But I was very, very lucky. I sat in an office with a girl named Julie Hamilton. Her first name was Julie Hata. And I even have goosebumps as I think of her. This little Japanese girl, dietitian, who knew more about people, about God, and about eating disorders than anybody I've ever met in my whole life. And not so much that she learned it in school, she learned it by being amongst people, by seeing deeper than what our society does is just look at the surface. And slowly but surely, all the counselors and her, and really the patients, started teaching me why people really struggle with food and their weight. And that's what I hope to teach you tonight. In maybe an hour and a half or 2, what it took me 2 years, Mr. Dents, to get. And I would say it took me 2 years because I was trained in school, by my parents, by our society, to think a certain way, to live a certain way. And it took me 2 years to kind of wipe some of that, all those protections away, all those lessons, not always the best lessons obviously, to take them away and to start to see this is what really is going on. And then over those times past working in the unit, I've been able to gain other pieces to help me gain some understanding of why people are really struggling with food and their weight. And everybody is different. There are many reasons why people struggle with food and their weight. And I hope to cover some of those and find the puzzle, the piece of the puzzle for you, if that's your struggle, that fits for you. Because all of us have a different story. All of us have different reasons. But if we can find the reason that really fits for me, then I know what I need to fix. But the biggest thing I ask for you is what we're talking tonight, is that you do one thing within yourself. You don't even have to do it within the class. Is that you're honest. Over and over and over, there's reasons, there's rationalizations, excuses, or like me, again, I can't think of a better word, just ignorance, just not knowing any different. And my pen is not even working all right. But if you can be really honest tonight, you might just find out not just why you struggle with food and your weight, you might find out some interesting things about yourself. You might start to learn some things of what makes you tick and what can make your life much different. But in that difference, you might find yourself a lot different than others in our society. You won't fit in with the crowd anymore. Remember, the crowd has been teaching us all these things. You're going to learn something not many people know. You might know in your heart, and you'll know if you're paying attention, you're going to know deep down, you know what, that's right. There's been little voices, because I've taken time to hear it, that have told me, this makes sense. And that's my goal tonight, is to try not to teach about those calories, not to teach about the recipes, not to teach about eating more of this, eating less fat, exercising this way. I'm going to try to teach you this little thing that's buried underneath the most of what society's been teaching you. Stuff that I've learned.